Okay, finally, we have an interesting question that is the subject of a lot of intense debate. Have we been visited before by extraterrestrials in the past? And of course, the answer to that is we don't know. But if we look at the possibilities for life being able to develop and technologies rising and falling, we might say that there's a reasonable chance that somewhere in the 4.6 billion year history of the Earth that we've been visited. But are we visited all the time? And of course we don't know that either. But we can say that there's no scientific evidence for this. And so some of you are probably saying to yourself, well, what are you talking about? There's Hangar 47, there's all of these other things that are conclusive proof. There's the face on Mars that we looked at before. There's the crop circles. There are the landing strip down in that the Incas made for the extraterrestrials down in South America. And so the way that I answer all of those objections is to say that that isn't scientific evidence. And so what is scientific evidence then? Well, scientific evidence requires that there's no other way of explaining the phenomenon. Okay? And so there must be inescapable conclusion that you come to is that a particular account of what was seen is the only way it could be interpreted. And so you can only interpret a scientific fact in one way. So what I'm trying to say by this is it doesn't allow for wishful thinking. So an example of this would be somebody, say, taking a hubcap and flinging it, and then they take a picture of it. I go, well, that's it, that's a flying saucer. And this, in fact, was done, and nobody could explain it, and so the inevitable conclusion was that that's really a flying saucer. But you have to also look at other possible explanations. And if those other explanations are just as valid as the one that supports extraterrestrials, then you have to conclude that that's not scientific thinking. Okay? And so an example of this would be, say, the UFO sightings that have been done near top secret government installations. Okay? And so that takes into account that Hangar 47 and a whole bunch of other ones. Turns out that most of the UFO sightings are near top secret government installations. So what does this mean? Does this mean that the extraterrestrials like government installations? No. It means that there is some other explanation. Maybe the government has a stealth bomber that is in research and development that, if you find out about it, they, of course, have to kill you and all of your relatives. But it's not that they're trying to cover up for UFOs to prevent a panic. It's that they're trying to cover their own security malfunction. Okay, and so the fact that most UFO sightings are near top secret government installations implies that this could be a government related test of some advanced kind of plane, for example. And so it turns out that the United States at one point was trying to make flying saucers, and they found out that they weren't stable. So you could have seen a flying saucer from that research and development type of thing as well. But the main point here is that none of the accounts of extraterrestrials and UFOs has any kind of scientific fact behind it, which would indicate that there's an inescapable conclusion of there being an extraterrestrial. Now, a lot of times we see what we want to see. One time I was up in the mountains with my friend, and we saw these tracks. And so we were wondering what it was, and we were able to get Google reception, and so we checked out the tracks, and they were the tracks of a mountain lion. And it had just started snowing, and we were the only people around, so I was starting to think, well, I don't have to be faster than the mountain lion, I just have to be faster than my friend. And then he told me, my friend, that you know how they attack, don't you? You know, they come in from above, and they land on your neck, and they attack you that way, and they tear into your neck. And so that made a little bit of an impression on me, and we kind of got out of there pretty fast. But then the next night I was hiking around, and it was getting dark, and I could have sworn I saw a mountain lion. And it looked just like a mountain lion, but it was because that was what was on my mind. I was thinking about mountain lions from the night before. And so I saw a mountain lion, and there was no mountain lion there. And so this is typical of the way that your mind processes information. Something like 70% of what you think you see comes from your internal mental model of the world, and only about 30% comes from what you're actually seeing in the external world, which just updates your internal mental model. And so before the time when there were it was thought that there could be extraterrestrials, any kind of an unexplained phenomena would be explained in terms of, say, a gremlin, a ghost, a spiritual aberration, something like that. But now, with the advent of War of the Worlds and the Time Machine and all of those other science fiction things, the thought now, when something is unexplained, is that it is an extraterrestrial. And so we should probably keep that in mind as we move to other observations, and our analysis of these operations is just to see that this is what we're expecting to see, and so therefore that's what we're starting to see. And so one other thing that I wanted to mention is that when there are accounts of extraterrestrials, they tend to look more like this. They tend to have two eyes, a nose, a mouth, bilateral symmetry, and so how many, even on the Earth, with identical kinds of raw materials, genetics, even a daffodil, we have 30% in common with our genetics with a plant. Flies, about 50% in common with the genetics of flies. We get to chimpanzees, it's something like 98% genetically similar. And yet, almost nothing on the surface of the Earth looks this much like a human. And so what would be the odds of seeing something that looked this much like a human coming from another world, where the DNA was different, the atmosphere was different, the raw materials for making life would be different? Is it possible? Yes. But when I see accounts of extraterrestrials that look like this, I tend to discount them immediately, because it's extremely unlikely. However, if I were to see something that was completely different from anything that I had seen before, that's more what I would expect to see. something totally and utterly foreign to my experience. And if I saw something like this, then I'd start to pay more attention. One other thing to keep in mind is that as we imagine what extraterrestrials would look like, we have been influenced by movies and by the media. What they do in a lot of these movies is they'll take some grotesque creature, they'll take a human, and then with the wizardry of computers, they morph them, basically, so that the creature looks something like a hideous monster and something like a human, so that there's enough of the humanness in the features so that we can relate to it, but enough of the hideous creature so that we're horrified by it. So these are the kinds of images that are being put in our mind by movies and by the media in general.